The sound of my Cessna 172's propellers faded into silence when I shut off the engine. The feeling of freedom that flying gave me was unmatched, a privilege I had enjoyed for years on my own landing strip. It was my grandfather's legacy. These lands had been the home of our family for 3 generations, a rural retreat where I raised my son Connor away from the urban hustle. That Tuesday morning, when I was returning from an emergency medical delivery to a nearby farm, I spotted something unusual at the south end of my runway. From a distance, they looked like giant yellow ants. As I got closer, the reality hit me. 3 bulldozers were completely blocking my landing strip. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Inside each machine, identical notices printed on thick paper read, Notice OF Non-Compliance. This structure does not meet the aesthetic standards of the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Contact immediately for regularization. Victoria Reynolds, President. I snatched one of the notices and crumpled it in my hand. Pine Ridge was that new development that had popped up 2 years ago on the east side of my property. Victoria Reynolds had tried to approach me 3 times in recent months, always with that rehearsed smile, insisting that joining the association would substantially increase the value of my property. Your runway is a problem, sir. The noise pollution affects our residents' quality of life. Think about the devaluation it causes, were her words at our last meeting, to which I replied that my property was not under the jurisdiction of her association. My lawyer managed to get a court order for the bulldozers to be removed within 2 days. Victoria didn't show up at the preliminary hearing, sending only her legal representative who vaguely argued about territorial expansion of the HOA, an argument the judge quickly dismissed. The victory was temporary. The following week, I noticed a black sedan parked regularly on the country road that runs through my property. Its occupants were taking photos and making notes. Later, notices for violations started appearing in my mailbox, citing regulations that didn't apply to my lands. Connor, my 16-year-old son, came home from school one afternoon clearly shaken. Dad, Tyler's mom talked to me after class. She said we should sell the farm and move to a more civilized place. She mentioned that our property is hurting everyone's investments in Pine Ridge. I tried to stay calm as I explained to Connor his rights as a rural landowner. He always loved our farm and the landing strip, where he had already started his first flying lessons. His dream was to become an agricultural pilot, just like I was before I became a firefighter. One morning, after returning from an instructional flight with a student, I ran into 4 HOA members walking near the border of my property with measuring equipment. When I confronted them, they claimed they were checking the proper boundaries for a community expansion project. I made it clear that they were trespassing on private property. That evening, while we were having dinner, Connor received a message from the school principal. His participation in the county science fair had been reconsidered due to technical issues. His project on sustainable agriculture, which we had worked on together for months, was suddenly disqualified. On a Wednesday, Connor didn't come home from school. His classes finished at 3:30 p.m. and, when the clock hit 5 without any word, I started calling frantically. His cell phone kept going straight to voicemail. I drove to the school, which was closed. None of his friends knew where he was. While I was about to file a missing persons report at the local police station, I received a video on my cell phone. In it, Connor appeared sitting in a chair, scared but unharmed, in a dim place that looked like a storage room. A distorted voice said, "If you want to see your boy again, get your situation with the Pine Ridge HOA sorted out in 48 hours. The instructions will follow." My blood went cold when I noticed, at the back of the video, the same logo that appeared on the official communications from the Pine Ridge HOA. Behind Connor, you could partially see a window with a characteristic red roof just like the one on the newly built community club at the entrance of the development. I didn't involve the police immediately. I knew I needed more evidence before accusing a homeowners association of kidnapping. I called the one person I trusted completely, James, my old firefighting partner. They really crossed the line this time, James said as he watched the video for the 3rd time in my kitchen. At 43, he had left the fire department to work in private security, skills that were now crucial. "I can pinpoint that storage room," He continued. It's the maintenance area behind the HOA club. I installed their security system last year before I knew how they operated. I spent the night discreetly watching the community club with James. Around 10 p.m., we saw Victoria leaving the main building with a tall man I didn't recognize. Using James' equipment, we managed to capture snippets of their conversation. Hudson, keep the kid isolated until his father signs. He's got until tomorrow night. If he refuses, you know what to do, Victoria said, handing an envelope to the man. Is the paperwork ready? I need to make sure everything's legal this time, replied the man identified as Hudson. Victoria laughed. Legal? Since when have we cared about that? That runway and all that land will be ours by the end of the week. The father doesn't have a choice now. While James kept watch, I went back home and accessed a safe hidden in the basement. Inside were documents I had never shared with anyone except my lawyer. Over the past 2 years, I had quietly acquired strategic plots of land around Pine Ridge, including the spring that supplied the entire development and parts of the original subdivision that had never been developed. I called my lawyer at 3 in the morning. I need to activate that clause we discussed, I explained. And I want to start a full review of Pine Ridge zoning records. Meanwhile, I organized the photos and recordings James had gathered and sent them anonymously to Sarah Anderson, an investigative journalist at the regional newspaper. I included documents proving that the HOA was operating beyond its legal jurisdiction, along with details about possible tax fraud I had discovered during my own investigation. The next morning, I received a message from Victoria, HOA Club. 8 p.m. Come alone with the signed transfer documents. Attached was a contract that essentially ceded much of my property, including the runway, to the association for a fraction of its value. Instead of replying, I sent Victoria just a link. When she clicked it, she'd see the article that had just been published on the newspaper's website, possible kidnapping and extortion tied to the Pine Ridge Homeowners Association. Sarah Anderson's article went live on the newspaper's website at 5:45 p.m., spreading quickly on social media. At 6:20, my phone rang. It was Sarah. I just got an anonymous tip about some suspicious activity at the development. They are emptying out a shed behind the club in a rush. I think they might be moving your son, she said, her voice full of urgency. I immediately contacted James. He was already positioned near the club, watching from afar. Confirmed. A man and a woman just left the shed and loaded something or someone into an unmarked white van, James reported. I'm tailing them, but from a distance. Meet me on the secondary road. I jumped into my pickup and drove to our pre-arranged meeting point as part of our contingency plan. On the way, I activated the tracking app James had installed on his vehicle. The van was headed west, toward the still under construction area of Pine Ridge, the so-called Phase 3 of the project. They are entering the complex of abandoned model homes, James informed me over the phone. The ones the developer left unfinished when the economy slowed down. Victoria should have access since the HOA took over the maintenance of the area. I parked a few blocks away and approached on foot, using the cover of trees and uncut vegetation. The darkness of the moonless night was on my side. James met me near the perimeter and pointed to a model home at the end of the street, the only one with a running generator outside. I heard the man mention something about waiting for Victoria's final instructions, James whispered. He seems impatient. I think he's starting to understand that he's in deep. We moved slowly toward the building. The 2-story model home had that peculiar look of something almost perfect but abandoned, windows too big, expensive finishes in a structure that was beginning to fall apart. Through the gaps in a makeshift curtain on the first floor, I saw a tall man, presumably Hudson, pacing around, constantly checking his cell. We need to create a distraction, I murmured to James. And I need you to record everything. James nodded and disappeared into the darkness. 3 minutes later, his car alarm went off in the parking lot along with the emergency lights, creating a racket that shattered the night silence. Just as expected, I saw Hudson glance nervously out the window and, after hesitating for a few seconds, head out the front door to check, leaving it ajar. This was my chance. I slipped in quietly, moving like I used to when I was a firefighter in unstable structures. The house smelled of mold and dry paint. At the end of the hallway, the door was locked with an improvised padlock. Using a multi-tool I always carried, I broke the mechanism in seconds. Connor was inside, sitting in an office chair, his hands tied with zip ties to the chair's arms. His eyes widened when he saw me, a mixture of relief and fear. "Dad," he whispered as I quickly cut his restraints. "They are crazy. The woman, Victoria, came here earlier and said you were destroying the community and needed to be taught about civility." "Let's get out of here first and talk later," I replied, giving him a brief hug before helping him stand. We heard hurried footsteps coming back into the house. Hudson was returning. We led Connor out through the back door, just as I heard Hudson coming back to the room where my son had been held. The ensuing angry shout was muffled by the sounds of the night as we quickly moved away through the overgrown gardens. James met us at our designated point with his vehicle and we left immediately. On the way home, Hudson called my cell, a number that Victoria had certainly provided. "You don't know who you're messing with," he threatened. "Give the kid back and maybe we can talk." "I think it's you who doesn't know," I replied calmly. "Look at the news. And tell Victoria that in 15 minutes the state police will be at the model home with a warrant. I'd advise you not to be there." I hung up while Connor looked at me, a new admiration in his tired eyes. At home, a doctor friend was already waiting to check on my son. Meanwhile, I handed over to the police all the communication records, the recordings James made, and the physical evidence I had collected from the model home, including a notebook left by Hudson containing damning documents. Sarah Anderson arrived shortly after with a reporting crew. Instead of doing a full interview, I only agreed to a brief statement, with Connor by my side, his expression determined despite the dark circles under his eyes. "This isn't about a condominium dispute," I told the camera. "It's about abuse of power, extortion, and serious crimes committed by people who think they're above the law. We trust the authorities to deliver justice, but we're also calling for a broader investigation into how homeowners associations operate without proper oversight in our state." The report aired during the nightly news and spread nationally by the next morning. My phone didn't stop ringing with calls from other homeowners reporting similar abuses in communities managed by Victoria Reynolds. "You opened Pandora's box," Sarah commented on a later call. "I'm getting tips about at least 3 other developments. It looks like the Pine Ridge HOA is just the tip of the iceberg." The next morning began with helicopters flying over Pine Ridge. State police, accompanied by federal agents, executed search warrants simultaneously at the HOA club, at Victoria's residence, and at the offices of the property management company she controlled. Connor and I watched from our porch as official vehicles passed along the country road. He was still shaken, but the determination in his eyes was unmistakable. "Do you think they're going to arrest her?" he asked, holding a mug of hot chocolate in his hands. "The evidence is too strong," I replied. "But people like Victoria have resources and connections. Justice isn't always." I was interrupted by the phone ringing. It was James. "Turn on the TV now. Channel 7. On the screen, a reporter was live on air while the camera showed Victoria Reynolds being escorted out of her mansion. Barefaced and still in a silk robe, the shocked expression on her face was a stark contrast to the polished image she always presented at community events. "Victoria Reynolds is being arrested on federal charges that include extortion, kidnapping, conspiracy, and possible tax fraud," the reporter stated. Sources say the investigation intensified after documents were found indicating a systematic pattern of abuses in multiple communities under her management. Connor squeezed my hand silently. We watched as the so-called guardian of community values was placed in the back seat of a police car. The phone rang again. This time it was an unfamiliar voice. "Sir, this is Margaret Reynolds," the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm Victoria's older sister. I know I have no right to ask for anything, but we need to talk. There are things about my sister you need to understand. And information that might help your case." I agreed to meet her at a cafe in town. Connor insisted on coming along, new courage emerging after everything he had been through. Margaret looked much like Victoria from years ago, though with tired eyes and without that aura of unyielding authority. Victoria wasn't like this when we were young, Margaret began, staring at her untouched coffee. Our family lost everything in the 2008 real estate crisis. Our parents invested in a project that failed, leaving us practically homeless. Victoria swore she would never be vulnerable again. That doesn't justify kidnapping, Connor interjected firmly. Margaret nodded. I'm not defending her. I'm explaining how someone becomes like that. She started working with developers, learned the ins and outs of contracts, zoning, property management. She discovered how to use rules to control people. And she realized how much power came with it. She slid a folder across the table. Here are copies of documents that Victoria kept in her personal safe. They show how she manipulated HOA contracts from the start, inserting clauses that gave the association, or rather, her expansive powers that the owners never realized they were granting. I thumbed through the documents, noting familiar patterns of deliberately obscure legal language and hidden conditions in attachments that were rarely read. Why are you showing me this? I asked, studying her face for any hidden motives. Because more people will get hurt if the system keeps working like this, Margaret replied. Victoria is just a symptom. The problem is bigger. And because, she hesitated, I think you're the right person to expose this. You were the only one who stood up to my sister and won. In the following days, a storm formed around the Pine Ridge HOA. Gregory Hudson, identified as the man who had held Connor captive, negotiated a deal with the district attorney's office in exchange for information about Victoria's entire scheme. He revealed that he was an unlicensed private investigator hired by Victoria for various, special jobs, over the years, including intimidating defiant homeowners in other communities. The investigation showed that Victoria had systematically diverted funds from the condominium fees into personal offshore accounts, and she had been receiving undeclared commissions from contractors hired for association projects. Her crimes extended well beyond Pine Ridge, affecting at least 5 other communities where her management company operated. A week after the initial arrest, federal agents carried out a second operation, this time arresting 3 members of the HOA board and a county planning department employee, all implicated in Victoria's scheme. Meanwhile, in Pine Ridge, a power vacuum settled in. Robert Parker, a longtime resident known for his loyalty to Victoria, tried to take control of the association with promises of continuity and stability. At an emergency meeting in the community club, he proposed sticking with the territorial expansion plans, including the forced annexation of neighboring properties, essentially the same agenda as Victoria's, just with a new face. We need to protect our investments, Parker argued, looking directly at me in the crowded room. I had attended the meeting with Sarah Anderson, who was covertly recording everything. What happened to Victoria was unfortunate, but our goals as a community remained the same. That's when I stood up, feeling everyone's eyes on me. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, keeping my voice calm, before you make any decisions about the HOA's future, you need to be aware of some important facts. Facts that Victoria Reynolds and the old board kept hidden from you for years. A heavy silence fell as I pulled out from my folder the documents Margaret had given me, along with additional discoveries made by my lawyer. First, the water that supplies Pine Ridge comes from a spring located on my property, with easement rights that were irregularly negotiated. Second, I recently found out that my grandfather never sold the mineral rights to this land when the area was first subdivided, which means that legally, I own rights to the underground resources for a large part of this community. And third, according to the original topographic survey filed with the county, the territorial expansion proposed by Victoria and now by Mr. Parker overlaps with land protected by a permanent environmental easement. The growing murmur in the room was cut off by Parker's outraged shout, "That's bluff. He's trying to intimidate us." I smiled calmly while passing copies of the documents to those in the front rows. Every owner here should ask themselves, how much of your monthly fee has gone to phantom projects? How many of you saw your homes devalued by arbitrary policies created to benefit certain developers? And most importantly, do you really want to live under a system that allowed one person to gain so much power without any accountability? The meeting dissolved into controlled chaos, questions flying, residents scrutinizing the documents, Parker desperately trying to regain control of the situation. Sarah Anderson moved through the crowd, gathering statements from homeowners who now realized how long they had been manipulated. As I left, a group of residents approached me, led by an elderly lady who introduced herself as the very first buyer in Pine Ridge. "We want to completely reform the HOA," she said firmly. "And we'd like your help in creating a fairer model that protects our homes without tyrannizing our neighbors." I looked at those hopeful faces, ordinary people who had been led to believe that strict rules and aesthetic uniformity were the only way to protect the value of their investments. I realized then that the real battle was only beginning. 3 weeks after Victoria's arrest, I received an unexpected court notice. Even though Victoria was being held in a federal penitentiary awaiting trial, she had managed to file a counterclaim. The document alleged that I had falsified the mineral and water rights and requested a restraining order to prevent me from interfering with the Pine Ridge HOA's operations. "She just won't give up," my lawyer commented as he went over the documents in my office. "But she made a critical mistake. The papers she submitted to contest your mineral rights have inconsistencies in the dates. They look like they were altered recently." Connor, slowly recovering from the kidnapping trauma, stared out the window as we discussed the situation. "Why is she still fighting?" he asked, turning to us. "Everyone knows what she did." My lawyer gave a sad smile. "For people like Victoria Reynolds, losing control is worse than losing freedom. Power has become part of her identity. Even from prison, she'll try to manipulate things however she can." The hearing was set for 2 weeks later at the county court. In the meantime, I worked tirelessly with James and Sarah to gather more evidence. We contacted former employees from Victoria's management company, who began talking after they saw the news about her arrest. One of them, a former company accountant, provided records of suspicious transactions linking Victoria to a network of shell companies used to launder funds diverted from HOAs. On the day of the hearing, the courtroom was packed. Residents of Pine Ridge and other affected communities filled every available seat. Victoria was brought in handcuffed, but she still maintained that impeccable posture, as if she were presiding over a board meeting rather than facing serious charges. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the front calmly, carrying an old leather folder that had belonged to my grandfather. "Sir, the defendant claims that the mineral rights you're asserting were transferred to Sunset Development in 1974, before Pine Ridge was built," began Victoria's lawyer. "How do you explain these documents that clearly show your grandfather's signature on that transfer?" I slowly opened the folder and took out a set of time-worn documents. "These are the original property records, kept by my grandfather and later by my father," I explained. "They include the original contract with Sunset Development with all its pages and attachments." I handed the documents to the judge, who examined them carefully. "As you can see, on page 14, paragraph 3, it is clearly stated that the mineral and water rights were explicitly excluded from the sale. More importantly, Your Honor, the version submitted by the prosecution is incomplete. It's missing exactly the pages that contain these exclusions." Victoria's lawyer tried to interject, but the judge raised his hand and scrutinized the documents closely. "Furthermore," I continued, "I'd like to draw attention to the dates on the documents submitted by Ms. Reynolds. The letterhead used has the current Sunset Development logo, updated in 2015. It would have been impossible for that logo to appear on documents supposedly from 1974. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the judge examined the details I pointed out. Victoria abruptly stood up. "This is ridiculous. He's twisting these old papers to extort our community. Pine Ridge is not going to bow to a farmer who refuses to accept progress." The judge ordered her to sit, his expression hardening. Victoria had always underestimated the people around her, assuming that her confidence and social standing would be enough to intimidate anyone. But in light of the clear evidence of document tampering, even her own lawyer looked uncomfortable. The hearing continued with the testimony of the former accountant, who detailed how Victoria had systematically diverted funds and manipulated records. He presented spreadsheets, bank statements, and emails that demonstrated a consistent pattern of fraud. By the end of the day, the judge was visibly upset. His decision was clear and unequivocal. This court recognizes the validity of the mineral and water rights claimed by the plaintiff. Furthermore, given the evidence of potential tampering with judicial documents, I am referring this case to the public prosecutor for further investigation into perjury and obstruction of justice by Ms. Reynolds. As we left the courthouse, an elderly woman approached me, leaning on a cane. "Young man, I'm Eleanor Mitchell. My husband and I bought one of the first homes in Pine Ridge 18 years ago. Victoria made our lives a living hell when we refused to swap our shutters for HOA-approved models. We eventually gave in because they threatened to put a lien on our house to cover the fines. I just wanted to thank you for doing what no one else had the courage to do." That moment crystallized something I had always felt intuitively. The battle was never just about my landing strip or my property. It was about something far more fundamental, the right of people to live in their homes without tyranny disguised as community standardization. On the drive home, Connor looked pensive. "Dad, what's going to happen with Pine Ridge now? And what about our lands?" "The people of Pine Ridge will have to decide what kind of community they want to be," I replied. "And as for us, well, I think we have a chance to show that there's a better way." A week later, I received a surprising phone call. It was from the governor's office. My case had caught the attention of a state legislative committee that was drafting a bill to regulate the power of HOAs. They wanted my testimony and input for the new regulations. "Your experience is an extreme case that shows how a lack of proper oversight can lead to abuse of power," the legislative assistant explained. "It would be valuable to have your perspective during the public hearings." While I considered the invitation, another revelation emerged. A forensic audit of Victoria's company accounts revealed that she had used diverted funds to secretly buy strategic properties around Pine Ridge, including parcels bordering my farm. Her apparent plan was to gradually corner my property, cutting off access and creating problems until I had no choice but to sell. With those assets being seized by the authorities, one crucial question emerged: what would happen to those lands now? A month after the hearing, a new interim board took over the Pine Ridge HOA. Led by more moderate residents, they invited me to an informal meeting at the community club, the same place where Victoria had schemed against me for years. The atmosphere was completely different. Instead of formally arranged tables as in a courtroom, residents had set up sofas and chairs in a circle, creating a space that encouraged genuine dialogue. "We're starting from scratch," explained Diana Rodriguez, the new interim president. "We've completely rewritten the internal regulations to ensure transparency and clear limits on power. And we want to begin by establishing a positive relationship with our neighbors, especially you." Listening carefully, I realized how much those people, too, had been victims, not just of Victoria but of a system that promised safety and property appreciation in exchange for absolute conformity. "The properties confiscated from Victoria create an almost continuous belt between your land and our development," Diana continued, unfolding a map on the central table. "The court decided that they will be auctioned off to help compensate the fraud victims. But before that happens, we had an idea." The proposal was surprising. The Pine Ridge community wanted to create a natural transition zone, a shared green area that would serve as an ecological barrier and recreational space on both sides. Instead of walls and fences, they proposed trails, community gardens, and preserved natural areas. "It would be a symbol of the new relationship we want to build," explained a middle-aged resident who introduced himself as a science teacher. "Frankly, many of us came to this area precisely for its natural beauty, not to live in a generic suburb." As we discussed the possibilities, Connor arrived with James. My son had spent the morning at the hangar helping maintain the planes. Since the kidnapping, he'd grown more confident and determined, as if the experience, despite its trauma, had revealed an inner strength he hadn't known he had. "I've got an idea," announced Connor as he joined the conversation after listening for a few minutes. "What if we use part of the farm and these new lands to create a summer camp for kids from the city? We could teach them about sustainable agriculture, ecology, and even the basics of flying." The room fell silent for a moment as everyone considered the suggestion. "A place where urban kids can experience rural life," Connor continued with growing confidence. "Many of them never get in touch with nature or understand where their food comes from. We could also set up a partnership with the schools in Pine Ridge, connecting communities through the kids." Diana beamed. That's brilliant. Our younger families have always complained about the lack of educational activities for kids during the summer. In the following weeks, the idea rapidly evolved. Working with Diana and the new Pine Ridge Board, we developed a comprehensive plan to create Campo Horizon, an educational program that would combine environmental education, sustainable agriculture, and for older kids, an introduction to aviation. At the same time, my hearings at the State Legislative Committee were gaining traction. The bill to reform HOAs had incorporated many of the protections I suggested, including clear jurisdiction limits, mandatory financial transparency, and independent arbitration processes for disputes. Your story has changed the perspective of many legislators, the committee aide said. It's no longer just about aesthetic regulations or property values. It's about basic civil liberties. Victoria Reynolds was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison on multiple charges, including extortion, kidnapping, tax fraud, and document forgery. During the trial, a pattern of predatory behavior emerged that spanned over a decade and affected hundreds of families. The judge, in handing down the sentence, specifically noted how she had perverted the idea of community, turning it into a tool for control and personal enrichment. One sunny spring afternoon, 6 months after the nightmare began, Connor and I walked around the perimeter of our property. Construction on Campo Horizon had begun, with Pine Ridge volunteers helping to renovate an old barn that would be turned into a classroom and community space. I bet Grandpa would be proud, Connor said, watching the work. He always said that this land should feed more than just our bodies. I smiled, remembering my grandfather's words. He was right. And now, this land will nourish minds and spirits, too. We reached the landing strip, recently expanded and improved. As part of our agreement with Pine Ridge, specific flight times had been established to respect the residents' peace, while still preserving our right to operate the strip. In return, I agreed to provide emergency medical flights when needed and also help with search and rescue operations in the nearby mountainous area. Ready to fly? I asked Connor, pointing at the Cessna 172 waiting on the runway. My son nodded, his face lighting up with the same enthusiasm that the kidnapping had nearly taken away. Always. As we flew over our property, I could see the transformation happening below. Where there had once been tension and division, something new was emerging. The boundaries between Pine Ridge and our farm remained, but now they were porous, with shared spaces and common purposes. From above, the view was revealing. The grid-like, uniform structures of Pine Ridge gradually merged with the natural, irregular fields of the farm, creating a transition that seemed to symbolize a new balance between urban and rural, between individuality and community. Connor took the controls, his hands steady and confident on the yoke. I watched with pride as he navigated the skies with the same determination he had shown during our ordeal. It's funny, he remarked, looking at the horizon. Victoria wanted so badly to control everything that she ended up losing it all. And we, who just wanted to be left alone, ended up connecting with more people than ever. I nodded, recognizing the wisdom in my son's words. Sometimes you have to weather a storm to find out who you really are and what truly matters. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Connor guided the plane in a big circle over the entire property, the ancestral farm, the new Campo Horizon area, and the borders of Pine Ridge, all united under the same open sky. From above, the man-made boundaries disappeared. There was only the land, the sky, and the small figures of people working together below, building not just structures but a true community based on mutual respect and shared purpose. Subscribe to the channel and leave your like to get access to more stories like this. Let's land, I finally said with a smile to my son. We've got a lot of work ahead. Connor agreed and began the descent with precision and confidence. And so much sky left to explore.